particular I've never met, don't know, never communicated with, and we are looking into and reviewing how the heck he got into this room.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
It's the dumbest thing I've seen in the handling of classified information.
If this information had gotten out, American lives could have been lost.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, what is the signal and what is the noise? A journalist mistakenly received Trump administration war plans in advance of an attack on Houthis in Yemen. This stunning security lapse coming his way on an unsecured commercial app known as Signal. Was the information classified? Were laws broken? Could this lead to a shakeup within Trump's national security team? Among those texting about the secret plans, including, quote, operational details, unquote, were National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
I inadvertently discovered a massive security breach in the way the national security establishment conducts its business.
It was not great timing for the Trump administration, but it was pretty good timing for all those with questions about this snafu. Today, top intelligence officials held their annual Senate hearing on worldwide threats, and there, Democrats took the opportunity to push for more answers on this whole war plans chat group, while Republicans worked as best they were able to minimize the damage.
This is one more example of the kind of sloppy, careless, incompetent behavior, particularly towards classified information.
Obviously not a good thing. Again, it'll be up to the president, seeing how he wants to handle it. I'm sure it's a mistake that's been corrected right now.
So many other questions. Had there been warnings, for example, from allies, from tech firms, and even from within the Pentagon about the dangers of using Signal to discuss any sensitive information or plans? And how about those U.S. military raids against Houthi targets? Were they a success? The White House says unequivocally yes and adds that's all that really matters. But who are the Houthis? What are they doing? And will this aggressive new Trump-era military campaign against them reopen shipping or increase the risk of a wider Middle Eastern war? Our goal in the next hour, sort out as much of this as possible. And of course, we will have the deluge of reaction from Capitol Hill and reminders about past political statements regarding the care required in handling classified information. I want to start tonight with Finn Gomez and James Laporta and Nicole Killian. James, I want to start with you because you have brand new reporting on a bulletin issued regarding Signal from the NSA.
I do. So today, CBS News obtained a bulletin that went out to all NSA employees in February 2025. So this is a month before the Houthi Signal chat was created. What this bulletin basically said was it detailed the vulnerabilities of using Signal. One of them being that they have information that Russian hacking groups are using Signal to send out phishing scams in order to bypass the encryption software that Signal uses to get into chat rooms. And that way, Russian hackers can see the actual chats, the messages going back and forth. It also detailed how, even if it's unclassified information, it should not be on Signal whatsoever. Unclassified information, controlled unclassified information, or anything that dealing with for official use only information should not be on Signal, period.
So this is a bulletin issued under the National Security Agency's aegis, the Trump administration's National Security Agency, to everyone who might think about using Signal.
Correct. That's absolutely right. I mean, the NSA said, use it to communicate with your families and your friends, but not to share unclassified information, not to share troop movements and things like that, things that are not classified, things that are not on the top secret level.
So we mentioned this at the top of the show. John Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard, two significant members of the Trump administration, the national security realm, were at the Senate hearing and talked about this. Let's listen.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
There was no classified material that was shared in that
So then if
signal
there was no
check.
classified material, share it with the committee.
So, James, I'm curious about this verbal effort today to minimize what this was, because several people, including the president, have suggested this wasn't classified.
Right.
Does that mean that there has been a retroactive declassification of it? Because it seems to me, based on my elemental knowledge of these kinds of plans, that in the moment, they are definitely classified.
U.S. intelligence officials that I've spoken to over the past day, members of the U.S. military, anybody dealing with classified material does not understand how talking about targeting plans is not classified. They don't understand that.
Timing, munitions,
targets, potential collateral damage reports, things of that nature. Those are all on the secret or top secret level. But let's say, for the sake of argument, they are. Let's say they are unclassified. According to the NSA bulletin, they're still violating cybersecurity protocols. They're still violating operational security protocols. So that's the NSA, and according to intelligence officials and members of the military. So regardless if they're classified, they still feel that there's a violation.
Finn, I want to get to you about what the implications are for National Security Advisor Mike Waltz in a moment, but I want to refresh all of our memories about past political statements from Republicans about the need to look out for classified information and to treat it with the utmost care. Let's play that.
It is irresponsible for an elected official in her capacity to be discussing highly sensitive things on a format that she had to have known was not fully secured.
And the risk of that is?
The risk of that is that we're giving opponents of this government or adversaries some insight.
And don't forget, there's 30,000 other emails that she said she deleted about yoga class and gifts, but the FBI has recovered a lot of those. If even a few of them contain classified secret or top secret information, that's even more damning.
Many of us felt that there should have been a prosecution started with respect to Hillary Clinton regarding classified emails.
You will note, Finn Gomez, that all three of those sound bites come from current members of the national security team of the President of the United States.
And all three members were also in that signal chat.
They were indeed.
Major, no, look, if on Waltz,
yes,
you were asking about Waltz earlier. Like we have talked to, CBS News has talked to several sources close to the White House, close to the administration, on his future, if you will, and you know, from early on, he's had his detractors. Some have said he is not MAGA enough, that he's sort of a closet neocon, of course, but he has a fervent amount of support also within Trump world. We saw that since some of the outcry, some of this backlash, the fallout, if you will, since the Signal story broke. But they have circled the wagons around him. But the president himself was asked about this, and he said that he does not think that Waltz should apologize. He's doing his best, and he called him a very good man. However, Major, he did ask him to look into this matter.
And the looking into part is sound I want to play for the audience right now from the president with Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, sitting around the table. Let's listen.
But it's not a perfect technology. There is no perfect technology. The really good ones are very cumbersome, very hard to access. I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best. It's equipment and technology that's not perfect, and probably he won't be using it again.
Read the body language there, Finn.
The body language is very Trumpian, I think, in the sense that he is supporting his guy, if you will, but at the same time, there's a little bit of distance there, right? And I think so I think privately we have heard that Trump is upset about this. He
described it as a glitch in public.
A glitch in public. But remember, as we know, Major, we've been
They don't acknowledge glitches.
And Trump doesn't acknowledge mistakes.
Right.
Very rarely does he say, I am sorry, or there was a mistake made by administration or by my surrogates. Because by saying that, by acknowledging that, is a show of weakness. And that is something that President Trump does not like to portray.
This, of course, is a story that ricocheted all around Capitol Hill, so I want to bring in Nicole Killian to join us for a summation of the reaction from Capitol Hill. Nicole, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. I want to play you kind of a gathering of Republicans outside of the Republican Capitol Hill Club talking about this, and then I'll get you on the other side. Let's give it a listen.
It's either a horrible mistake or someone did it on purpose to do somebody in. You know, My buddy Mike Waltz is a straight-up guy, and he's very honest, honorable. He's a patriot.
We all make mistakes, so I'm sure that that was not something that he intended or something that he wanted to happen. Give him a pass.
Look, mistakes happen. If it was a mistake, it is what it is, and it won't happen again. I know that.
Nicole, the word of the day: mistake.
Yeah, and that is something that Speaker Mike Johnson reiterated as well, that he believes that this was a mistake, also defending Mike Waltz and telling reporters just yesterday that he doesn't think that he should resign. I would note that Mike Waltz did resign from Congress earlier this year, and his seat is actually up for grabs next week in a special election. So even if he did decide to step down, he couldn't necessarily come back to his seat in this body. So for now, even on Capitol Hill, many congressional Republicans continue to rally behind him. I would note there is a little bit of daylight when you look at Senate Republicans, though. Talking to Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Roger Wicker, he did say that he's been talking to his counterpart on the committee, Jack Reed, that all options are on the table as far as they are concerned. So it is an issue where they might try to potentially hold a hearing in the future, seek more information, try to get a hold of that text thread if possible. And that is something that Leader Thune reiterated as well. So yes, while everybody acknowledges it was a mistake, there are some Republicans who are willing to look into this further. Certainly congressional Democrats have been very clear they believe that there should be some sort of congressional investigation, but more of those calls among Republicans tend to be on the Senate side. Perhaps maybe the Senate Armed Services Committee might be that starting point.
And James, it's evident that Jeff Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, is in possession of much of this unreleased information, which he said he didn't release out of deference and respect for a sensitive national security process.
Right. It's very chilling if the safety is coming from someone not in the national security community, right? But to your point, today, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said it's all unclassified. And the common thing we heard from lawmakers was, well, release it.
Release it. Let's let the public see it.
But I will tell you what's really on the line is credibility. The American public's going to debate the merits of this. People I've been hearing from the intelligence community and the military community have been saying, look, and these guys have also campaigned on this for a while, that if this was a private, if this was a low-level intelligence analyst, the book would be thrown at them, right? If it was unclassified or if it was classified, right? And so now credibility is on the line where they're now facing, they're now the senior leaders. Right. And so for these intelligence community members, for the military, it's like, well, you guys have been preaching holding the senior leaders accountable, and now you're in this crisis. What is your decision? What are you going to do?
That's an excellent way to wrap this up. James Laporta, Finn Gomez, Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. Thanks for getting us off to a great start on a very important news day. Coming up, more on, you heard the word, mistake. It didn't, but it could have cost American lives and the possible consequences of that information landing in the wrong hands. That didn't happen either, but it might have. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Atlantic's editor-in-chief, we've talked about his name before, Jeff Goldberg, is sharing why he chose not to disclose each and every detail of that Signal Group chat of principals within the Trump national security team. Here's what he told CBS News yesterday.
And I believe there's a very important public right to know how decisions are made about whether to go to war or not. I don't think that minute technical details about the timing of attacks or the weapons used, I don't think that's for me to discuss openly. Didn't seem responsible.
Samantha Vinograd and Joshua School join me now. Samantha, as you well know, a CBS News national security contributor. Josh, formerly served as the FBI's executive assistant director for intelligence. Josh, we'll get to you in a second, but I want to talk to Sam for a second because we previewed this in the open of the show because it's really important. Who are the Houthis? What are they doing? What is the difference in the Trump administration's new efforts to attack them militarily from what the Biden administration did? Let's just start with those three.
Sure. The Houthis have actually been around for a long time, since the 1990s. This is a Shia Islamist group, also known as Ansar Allah, who has for years tried to capture more territory in Yemen and to exert control. They've been locked in a brutal civil war with the Yemeni government and now control a sizable amount of territory. The Houthis are staunchly anti-Israel, anti-the U.S., and more. They are funded and supplied by the regime in Tehran and receive a lot of operational direction and support from them. In recent months, particularly post the Hamas terrorist attack against Israel, they have stepped up their efforts against shipping in the Red Sea and surrounding waters. And you asked about the Trump administration. Two key differences, Major. The Trump administration has more recently stepped up military strikes against the Houthis and designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization as well.
So they have proven themselves resilient against lots of different armed combatants. The Saudis were involved in that civil war for a while. And during that civil war, there were attacks on Saudi oil facilities, which is something that is a broader concern. If this attempt by the Trump administration to knock them out doesn't succeed or leads the Houthis to take military action against the Saudis, this thing could spread.
It could, and we have already seen the Houthis launch longer-range missiles into Israel and elsewhere, so this could spread. But I do think we have to wait and see how these military strikes play out. They do look to be sustained, and we'll have to see if the Houthis step back from these attacks in the Red Sea and elsewhere.
Josh, this is your lane of information that is classified, protocols, methods, how you're supposed to handle it. What are your most important takeaways from what you've absorbed so far about this Signal Track Group story?
Well, I think, obviously that's been blowing up all day. And unfortunately, what we saw was, at the very least, sloppy tradecraft, for lack of a better term. Certainly not appropriate to be communicating in that.
For people who should know better.
Exactly. Some are newer to the administration and probably getting used to it, especially when you have technology out there that you can use in a classified setting that will provide the ease to communicate. But I think also what happened today, aside from that, is we didn't learn what the administration's priorities are to combat the threats affecting the United States. This was so focused on Signal, and we've seen reporting of where they're going after the gangs, but there are also a large number of threats impacting the United States, China, Russia, Iran, to what we were talking about, the terrorist organizations.
Which would have been most of the questions from senators today had this Signal story not been part of it. Do you believe any laws might have been broken here?
I think you have the top intelligence officials who will make that determination, whether or not there's prosecution. Certainly, we have seen talk-arounds, if you want to call that, on unsecure channels previously with no prosecution. It's really whether there's an intent. I think there's a lot of lessons learned here. I think the Department of Justice will have to take a hard look at this, and this could be the first time that there's a conflict within this administration.
And when the president's... Go ahead,
I was just going to say, and today in the Intel hearing, the FBI director indicated the DOJ has not yet opened up an investigation into any potential breaches of law, whether that be a violation of the Espionage Act, a violation of the Presidential Records Act. So waiting really to see if DOJ takes that action.
Sam, you were trained on this sort of stuff, weren't you?
I was, and typically in my experience, Major, I have never seen a military operational plan, timing of strikes, weapons, troop movements, that isn't classified at some level. Now, Signal is used by government officials. There's special dispensation that's given, and there's protocols to follow to capture images. But the bottom line is anything that is not public, that you don't want the public to know or foreign governments to know, you don't put on an unclassified system.
And Josh, James Laporta was just on our air talking about his reporting that this bulletin from the Trump National Security Agency alerting people not to use Signal in anything other than the most benign ways ought to put this in some kind of context, legally or otherwise.
I would agree with that. There is also a bulletin from the FBI that says don't use text message at all anymore, going back months, because that's been penetrated. Just a point of clarification. It's the FBI's responsibility to open an investigation. They don't have to wait for Department of Justice. Now, many directors have deferred to the Attorney General for that kind of guidance, but it's Justice's job to prosecute, not to investigate. So we'll see how this conflict arises in this administration.
And the president said this afternoon, I don't think this is really an FBI matter. a kind of a signal.
I would say that that's a message.
To coin a word that's very topical the last 48 hours. Sam Vinograd, Josh School, thank you very much for being with me. I appreciate it. The War Plan group chat raising several questions, some of them legal. Was this information actually classified? Were any laws broken? This hangs over this entire conversation. We'll dig into those questions, and I hope to reveal some penetrating answers next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Several Democratic lawmakers today demanded investigations, and some even suggested there should be a resignation, one, maybe two, in the wake of the Trump administration's military group chat fracas. We'll call it that. The president, though, tried to minimize the scrutiny and possibly any long-term damage. Let's listen.
We've pretty much looked into it. It's pretty simple, to be honest. It's not. It's just something that can happen.
I want to bring in Andrew Bakai. He's an attorney and, importantly for this conversation, a former CIA intelligence officer. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. I just want to get your takeaways based on your training, your experience in this lane, and what kind of implications this story has from your perspective.
Well, thank you for having me on first, Major. I would say that there was one word that the president said that was accurate, and that is this is simple. And the fact of the matter is this was absolutely wrong to do. That this is, in my opinion, at the very least, the negligent mishandling of classified information. And I know that there is a question as to whether or not right now, at least being put out by the administration, as to whether or not this information is classified. At the very least, it's national defense information. So the fact of the matter is that there are statutes in place. In fact, the espionage does call out when somebody negligently mishandles national defense information. This would certainly fall into that category.
And therefore, it might be illegal.
Absolutely. And the thing is, there are a number of things that can happen during the course of a situation like this, if this were a typical federal employee, government contractor, intelligence officer, and that is they'll be immediately placed on administrative leave. Their security clearance would be suspended. There would be an administrative investigation, a criminal investigation. They would likely lose their security clearance, and absolutely, there could be a prosecution. So the fact of the matter is, yes, this would be taken extraordinarily seriously. I do know that a lot of individuals, I myself use Signal, and for personal usage, it could be deemed to be quite secure, but it's not something that you transmit classified or national defense information over. Not only that, it's not only that it was that they were using an unauthorized means of communicating, it's that classified systems are designed to even prevent somebody from being accidentally included into a chat like the reporter was, right? Into a conversation he was not supposed to be a part of. So there are reasons why classified systems are being used. And by the way, what's also important to note is that these are all senior government officials, cabinet level officials. They have access at all times, particularly when they travel, to be able to use the high side or classified communication systems with one another. There's absolutely no need to use personal devices or an off-the-shelf commercial product to communicate with one another, especially when it comes to national defense information.
And to that point, Andrew, one of the things I found most astonishing about this story was that nobody in this chat room, based on what we have seen so far, said those basic things like, what are we doing here? We shouldn't even be here.
You know what? It actually raises the question as to, is this the first chat that we have all these individuals coming together and having conversation about something like this? Maybe this is a new group that they created specifically for this particular event that's taking place or is currently taking place. But what about something else that we don't know about? So yes, it absolutely is a concern that this may not be a one-off. It's absolutely a concern that you have senior officials who know what they're doing, okay? You have the director of national intelligence in it, the CIA director in this chat apparently. These are people who know what the risks are, what the rules are, what the regulations are. At the end of the day, lives are at stake, right? And we do know that they were preparing on engaging in military action that involved U.S. military personnel. And operational security, even if you put aside the issue of classified information, Operational security is something that all members of the military, the armed forces hold dear. Why? Because their lives are at stake.
Right. And Andrew, to that point, you're taught, and I'm sure you were taught, and everyone in this space is taught, that our adversaries are lurking all around.
Absolutely.
And especially
Everywhere.
places like this, Signal.
Well, and the thing is that the reason why we handle this information with such sensitivity is because you don't know who may be able to penetrate communications devices. And for that matter, negligence in doing something as frankly boneheaded as they did is astonishing, because there is no way that any federal employee would ever do something like this and be able to continue in their job or not be held accountable, even at least administratively. So at the very least, if any other intelligence officer were to have done this, or somebody in the military, at the very least, they're put on admin leave, an investigation is being initiated, and they've lost their security clearance. And I wouldn't ever see them being able to regain it, not with facts like this.
I promised penetrating answers to our questions. Andrew Buckeye delivered them all. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
The White House is trying its best to minimize the seriousness of this whole episode. And the president has defended his national security advisor, Mike Waltz. Our reporter panel weighs in on all this momentous news next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth remains, and there really is no other word for it, defiant over this whole story we've been talking about for 35 minutes now. Here's what he said last night, and importantly, right after that is what the journalist who actually was in this group chat said in response.
Nobody was texting war plans.
No, that's a lie. He was texting war plans. He was texting attack plans. When targets were going to be targeted, how they were going to be targeted.
There you have it. I want to bring in our political reporter panel, Stephanie Lai and Reese Gorman. Stephanie is White House correspondent for Bloomberg. Reese is politics reporter for Notice. Remember, Notice, news of the U.S. It's great to have you both with us. I want to read to you something just handed to me during the commercial break. It is a letter to the President of the United States from Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader. I'll read excerpts from it. The most important is in the first sentence. Pete Hegseth is the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in American history. It goes on to say, his behavior shocks the conscience, risked American lives, and likely violated the law. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth should be fired immediately. And he adds sincerely, as if there was any doubt. Stephanie, it's been the dominant story, and I know that there are those in the audience who sometimes correctly blame Washington for overanalyzing a story that doesn't seem to resonate outside of the Beltway. But this one feels like it is worthy of a lot of attention and could have implications for the current composition of the Trump administration.
Certainly. And I think to your point, it does resonate with so many people because many of us have made the same mistake of adding someone to the wrong group chat or sending the wrong text message to the wrong person. And so what we're
hitting reply all. Uh-oh. Never mind.
And the national security implication here is very pressing. The fact that there are military plans being sent to a journalist. But I will say that this leak is very different than what we've seen in the first Trump administration. Those were much more deliberate. It was sources planting stories to potentially knife a different person in the back. This one was purely an accident.
Reese, your thoughts?
Yeah, to her point, this does happen quite a bit. Sadly, I've never been added to any classified group chats in my reporter career. But this does seem
There's always hope, though, right?
Maybe one day. But this does seem to resonate, especially on the Hill. Roger Wicker, chairman of Senate Armed Services, came out and basically said that they are going to look into this. Thune said there could be a Senate Majority Leader. So
and I'm really glad you brought that up, Reese, because Roger Wicker has said this in public. I took a tremendous political risk leaning my committee and my reputation and prestige on behalf of Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. And this is embarrassing, at minimum.
Yeah, and this is why, this Hegseth was one of the most controversial of Trump's
not just controversial, but there were genuine questions that I talked to Republicans who privately felt the heat from President Trump. They felt the echoing heat of the Trump social media universe, but they doubted whether Hegseth had the requisite knowledge base to be defense secretary. The skills, quite separate from his personal behavior, of which a lot of scrutiny was given.
Yeah,
that was an undercurrent of that whole confirmation hearing as well.
100%.
And now you have this.
Yeah, and then you could also tell this too, because I mean, Hegseth wasn't even the one that added the journalist to the chat. It was Michael Waltz. But because of Hegseth and these questions surrounding him, he seems to be the one that is getting most of the scrutiny on this because of just the questions swirling him from time he was nominated to his confirmation hearing, even to now. It seems to be that a lot of this focus is on Hegseth because he also was the one allegedly who shared these classified plans in the Signal group chat.
I want to play for you both some sound from earlier today on Capitol Hill from California Democrat Ted Lieu. And I think when you listen to this, you'll see that that was kind of a motivating factor probably to this letter that I just read from the House Minority Leader, Democrat Hakeem Jeffries from New York. Let's listen to Ted Lieu.
These are reckless actions by Secretary of Defense. And he also made it worse. Instead of accepting responsibility, he lied to the American people. He said this was our hoax. Hegseth needs to resign, and everyone on that text chain needs to go take some courses on how to deal with national security.
So, Stephanie, we are deeply accustomed from our experience in the first Trump presidency and for the early days now that outside pressure from Democrats, outside pressure from reporters who are scrutinizing things tends not to penetrate this White House. It just doesn't.
It doesn't.
They have a huge deflector shield. It just bounces off.
Right.
And the president's demeanor today was subdued, but he wasn't lashing out at anyone.
Yeah, and I think if you look at how the White House responded in the immediate aftermath of it, it really does go back to their usual playbook. They'll deflect the severity of the issue at hand. They'll then try to discredit the journalist who is raising the issue, and then they try to move on. That they're downplaying the fact that there were actual military and U.S. government intelligence that was being shared on this Signal chat, and that's been their go-to since that.
And Reese, there's also something said by the White House today, which I think is important, and we've talked about it, is, hey, the big story here is we have been more aggressively going after the Houthis, trying to deter them from harassing global shipping through the Red Sea, and that's the story.
Yeah.
That's what matters. We're different than Biden. We're much harder. Also reflective in this text chain. Blame Biden. Support us.
It is remarkable spin that they're like, oh no, this text change actually just shows how thoughtful we were in this process.
How thoughtful and how willing we are to debate these things internally.
Everyone spins, every politician spins, but that is remarkable spin. That's like the story is not y'all like how thoughtful you were in this process. The story is that a reporter was inadvertently imagine if it wasn't a reporter, if it was, say, like, I don't know, anybody else who maybe did not have as good of intentions as Goldberg did.
Right.
Who could have leaked this information elsewhere, could have sold this information before. There was a whole lot of things that could have gone wrong. And thankfully for them, it was a reporter who waited until after the attack to actually report on this information.
And all right, Stephanie Lai, Reese Gorman, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming in. The case of deported Venezuelans is now in the hands of an appeals court. I know we're shifting gears a little bit, but it's important, this growing legal battle and why the Trump administration is invoking something called the State Secret Act to avoid providing more information about those flights, even though a federal judge keeps asking for it. More on that next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Trump administration is refusing to provide a federal judge more information that the judge requested on last week's deportation flights to El Salvador. Today is the deadline for the Department of Justice to explain why it did not follow the district judge's orders. I want to bring in our Lilia Luciano and Jake Rosen for more. Jake, catch us up on where things currently stand.
Well, last night, Attorney General Pam Bondi, alongside Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, invoked the state secret privilege, which means that they're not intending on giving Judge Boasberg the answers to the questions that he sought, claiming that there are state secrets at play. It hurts their ability to deal with counterterrorism. It hurts their ability to deal with foreign relations as an administration. And from there, the administration says that it planned on filing, at some point today, it's due by the end of the night, a response as to why it did not turn those two planes around.
And how unusual is it, Jake, for a State Secret Act declaration to be made in court? And what are the implications of that?
Well, I think the implications are huge. And it's very rare. But I think in this specific case, all we're talking about here is two flights. And it's been established in the court record that the president signed this declaration in the dark. It was the day before it was officially announced that migrants, according to CBS News reporting, were moved from around the country to Texas, where they were then put on a flight. And those flights were basically about to take off as the White House hit send on this Alien Enemies Act proclamation, which means that there was some kind of machinations behind the scene. The Alien Enemies Act is meant to be done in daylight. It is something that historically...
Usually consistent with a declaration of war.
Yes, and I would just point out yesterday that a judge raised this by saying that even the Nazis who were removed from the United States in World War II got more due process than these Venezuelan alleged gang members did.
Lilia, you talked to Tom Homan, the border czar.
I talked to Tom Homan because what I have been investigating is who are these men. I have talked so far to 2 wives of men who don't appear to have any criminal record, not here, not in Venezuela, who say that they have no gang affiliations. One of them is 40 weeks pregnant, past her due date, alone in this country with no answers. I have been reaching out to the government of El Salvador, and they tell me that it is all in the hands of the United States. We cannot give you any information. We're just pretty much holding these men here. Ask your government. So I went to Tom Homan to understand what is the evidence? What is the government relying on in terms of evidence that these men are terrorists, as they call them? This is a little bit of how he responded.
We follow the law, the Alien Enemies Act. Again, people who are removed have less due process than others, and that's for a reason. There's a reason they wrote this statute in this law.
So absolutely no transparency on what the evidence is. All Tom Homan told me today is, I absolutely trust on the intelligence of our good men of eyes who have been investigating these men, but they have presented no evidence.
Am I right in assuming or reading somewhere that they're not even all men who were sent to El Salvador?
There was at least one woman who was reportedly released. So, I mean, there could be women who have gang affiliations.
Sure.
It's just impossible for us to know.
But they're not allowed at that
did.
prison in El Salvador.
They're not supposed to be allowed in that prison.
You've been there, right?
I was in that prison last month. This is a prison that was designed for the worst of the gang members who used to terrorize El Salvador. Not everybody there has been convicted of a crime. And the director of the prison told me, look, and so did some of the cabinet members of the Bukele government, yes, they haven't been convicted, but we are certain, we are confident in our evidence, we're confident in our investigations that everybody who is here is a terrorist gang member. It sounds very similar to what we are getting from our government.
And Jake, back to this assertion of the state secret's privilege, what the government is basically saying is, we've met a declaration, we're not going to prove it, and nobody can ask us any questions about it.
Absolutely. And the only information that they've been willing to put on the court record is that at 7:25 p.m. last Saturday night, the planes left U.S. airspace. They claim that because Judge Boasberg, again, this is at the root of this kind of chaos we've seen, because that order that he spoke verbally was not put in the writing to turn those planes around. Judge's orders, let me be clear, when they're issued from the bench, those are immediate, those are firm. But because that was not put in writing, the government says, well, you were too late, you didn't put it in, too late. And too bad.
And Lily, would it be fair to say that Tom Homan's perspective on this is, even if we made a mistake, we are doing something that is of such super important public safety that mistakes can happen?
He did not acknowledge that mistakes happened. He is adamant that they trust the intelligence. I asked him, I mean, what is that intelligence? Is that going to be revealed? And more importantly, what is the recourse for these men? At least those of us who don't have a criminal record. And of course, he went into the whole, we have to secure the border. I asked the women, the spouses of these men who are detained there, who I've interviewed over the last week, and they said, it's fine if they get deported. We'll figure it out. We'll go back to Venezuela with them. One of them is Peruvian, by the way, not even Venezuelan. But why are they in this prison? We have not seen any evidence. They have not had any due process. And Homan told me, under the Alien Enemies Act, people don't get due process.
It just doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. So
and they'd be willing, just
to
pick up what you just said, to go to Venezuela, just not to El Salvador, not this super bad prison.
Even if they have to go to El Salvador, just not have them in this black hole of a prison.
Lily Luciano, Jake Rosen, thank you both very, very much. The Trump team signals its disdain for Europe. How the war planning chat group is showing the depth of the rift between new and old worlds. That's next, right here on America Decides.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference in mid-February, expressing a dim view of the current state of European democracies and raising questions about the future of the transatlantic alliance. That attitude was on full display in a text group chat on Signal that many top administration officials had every reason to believe was private, wherein the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, referred to, quote, freeloading European countries as, quote, pathetic. Global affairs correspondent for The Guardian, Andrew Roth, joins me now. Andrew, it's great to have you with us. We'll get to some of the specifics from that text exchange on Signal in a moment, but your top-line view of what that exchange ought to signal to European countries right now.
Yeah, I think once again, that shows European countries what they already knew, that there's a target on their back right now, that even in a discussion about, strikes in Yemen, that the issue of Europe and, European freeloading, quote unquote, on the U.S., defense and military prowess and spending isn't the number one issue, especially for the Vice President, J.D. Vance.
Let's quote from that. J.D. Vance on this group text, which, again, the participants at the moment had to assume was going to be private. It no longer is. I just hate bailing Europe out again, says J.D. Vance. Let's make sure our messaging is tight here, and there are things we can do up front to minimize risk to Saudi oil facilities. We should do it. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, responds, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. Loathing, that has to rattle those who were not already rattled in Europe.
Yeah, I think that, once again, everything that we've seen in the last several months has shown a lot of, European officials, diplomats that we speak to, that the kind of trust in the transatlantic alliance and the old status quo is over to a certain degree. They have to expect the worst, and they have to prepare for the fact that the Trump administration, and I think in particular, again, J.D. Vance, is ready to significantly reimagine the relationship with Europe. You can see the dynamic that's playing there. Nobody really comes in to say that, Europe is not freeloading. Nobody really comes to Europe's defense in that discussion. But it does seem like they're trying to talk down Vance to a certain degree. But everybody repeats, the same kind of lines that Europe is pathetic, that Europe is freeloading. And it shows you that this is a pretty widespread view across the administration.
And Andrew, after that Munich Security Conference speech, there was some dialogue in Europe. Well, how serious are they? Is this really what Vance means? Does President Trump agree with that? I would have to imagine that this publicity surrounding this particular text exchange maybe clarifies that a bit.
Yeah, once again, with Trump, there's an understanding that he is transactionalist and that he's very much thinking in terms of the bottom line, either for himself, for the administration, maybe for the country. With Vance, this seems far more personal. He went to Germany, he gave that speech at the Munich Security Conference, and afterwards he met with the head of the AfD, somebody who's been kept out of German politics as a leader of a far-right party, with what was called the firewall. They're really breaking through a lot of the status quo here and what's accepted. And you can see from this text messages that were not supposed to be made public, that this is not just their public stance, but this is what they're discussing in private as well. So it's an extraordinary exchange, and I think it should be very disquieting to a lot of European diplomats, officials, and governments across the region.
What's the tempo of change in Europe regarding all this, and where's it heading?
I think that there has been a wake-up call that's been sent to Europe by what's taking place at the moment. But, once again, we're looking at 27 countries that all have different views on how to go forward. And some of them have a very different tenor. Besides France and Germany, we have Eastern European countries that are very concerned about the threat from Russia. But you also have countries that may see things more along the lines of Donald Trump, looking at Hungary for a certain degree, looking at Italy and other countries too. So I think that there's a sense that things are going to change very quickly. But all of a sudden, that European unity is also very much at risk. So right now is a kind of wait and see moment. There is a desire to, very much increase European defense spending. But the question is whether a couple of actors are going to be able to kind of trip that up going forward. It's a very big moment for the alliance and to figure out if Europe can go it alone.
The Guardian's Andrew Roth. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.